everyone. We're here for the public workshop for the toxicity criteria regulations. Hope everyone is in the right room. You in the right room? Okay. I'm Tammy Pickens, and before we get started, we're going to do some housekeeping. The bathroom is out the door to the left in case you need to go and use the restroom, and the water fountain is always right there. But we have water and cookies and refreshments for you. Today, my name is Tammy Pickens, and I will be facilitating this meeting. This is the second of 3 workshops that have been done on this toxicity rule. The first one was done in December 2016, prior to the regulation coming out. The third one will be done in August 31st in Cypress, California. Kevin and Kim Getman will be doing a presentation on the rules, and once the presentation is over, then we'll have a discussion and take your questions and answers from there. Before we get started, Mosan Nazmi would like to say a few words.
Thank you, Tammy, and welcome everyone to our toxicity criteria rulemaking workshop. As you heard, this is the second workshop, and we'll have another one this Thursday. I'm the Deputy Director for the Cleanup Site Mitigation Program for DTSC. And I want to welcome you to this workshop, and I wanted to first figure out where's the best place to stand so that webinar people can also see me. So I picked the spot. If it's not good, let me know. Just a quick background. This is a proposed rule that we are in the comment period. Actually, the rule package was released on August 4th, and it's a 45-day comment period. So September 20th will be a comment closing period. And during this time, we are providing some information. As you heard, both Kevin and Kim will give you a presentation on what the proposed rule contents are, and it is intended to be used for human health risk screening values, for human health risk assessments, and for making remedial decisions associated with human health risk. And we are here to explain the rule to you if you have any questions of what proposed sections mean, and we are not responding to all your comments today because we are still in the comment period. We were going to collect all the comments, and then we will have everybody's comments and then consider all of those before we make a final rule package. But if you have any clarification questions, if you need some questions about the applicability and things of that sort, we can give you an answer, but please don't take those as our final answer today because, like I said, we need to get everybody's comments and then make a final decision on the rule. And I will be here for part of the workshop, and I actually am based in Cypress, so I will be there Thursday for any of you who feel like flying down to Southern California. I can see you down there again. And that's all I really have to say. And again, thank you for coming to this workshop. I'm going to turn it over to Ray. Thanks. And maybe, Ray, if you can have all DTSC staff do a quick introduction.
Sure.
So they can know who we are.
Sure. The folks who are participating.
Hi, I'm Vivian Bryan, one of the attorneys here at DTSC.
Hi, I'm Kimberly Getman. I'm one of the toxicologists here at DTSC.
I'm Kevin Dempis. I'm an engineer and geologist with DTSC.
I'm Peter Bailey. I'm the senior supervising geologist for the geology unit.
I'm Ray LeClaire. I'm division chief of the cleanup program. And mainly what I want to do today is
I think you have a GIF here also.
Oh, I was just introducing the staff.
Oh, okay. All right. Got it.
We have lots of one.
Okay.
Curious as well. I wanted to basically just kind of give a refresher. We did a workshop last year to kind of explain the rule. We did a few revisions. Now we're coming back out again to do 2 workshops to help explain what this rule is. And I just want to clarify that today and Thursday are workshops. So we're here to present this to help explain so folks understand what we're doing, but we are not taking comments. So there's no one taking notes today. So if you have formal comments, you'll need to email them or go to our hearing on the 20th, and then we'll be taking notes, accepting those and taking notes for that one. But today and Thursday, we're not taking notes. So in other words, if someone brings up a really great question, we'll write it down, but it will not go on the record. So you'll need to give a great comment that comes out today. You'll need to put that in writing to it. So we'll come together. So that's all I really had to say, and I'll hand the tech stuff over to Kevin and Kim.
So first minor glitch is we are already supposed to be on the next slide. We'll get to that first. Let's see. Right there. Let's try an arrow. Arrows work. Hopefully I'm not blocking too many people's visual of it. So welcome. Thanks for coming. As my predecessors speaking spoke of, this is our second workshop. What we're here today to talk about is our proposed rule on toxicity criteria for selecting screening levels and remediation goals, and for human health risk assessments. It will be applicable to all hazardous substance release sites overseen by DTSC, including those under CERCLA and under corrective action. The rule is necessary to make sure California's more protective standards are applied consistently statewide. Promulgation of the toxicity criteria will provide the level of protection that factors in California-specific considerations. It's important to remember, though, that we're not changing anything that we've been doing for the last 2 decades. We're essentially just promulgating and codifying what we've been doing. All right, so the most important aspect of the rule are the toxicity criteria. And here's Dr. Kimberly Getman, who will explain to you the key elements of toxicity criteria.
Thank you, Kevin. So we use toxicity criteria, as it's been stated earlier, in our human health risk assessment. Those are site-specific and baseline. We use the criteria when we derive our risk-based cleaning levels for soil, air, and water, and we use them in deriving risk-based cleanup goals or remediation goals when a promulgated value is not available, such as a maximum contaminant level or M. So there are 2 types of toxicity values. The first one is a non-cancer value, and then the second one, which addresses the non-cancer component of our risk assessment. The second type of value is a cancer value, toxicity criteria value, and that addresses the cancer component of the risk. For both of these values, the non-cancer and the cancer, we have toxicity criteria that address both the oral exposure route and the inhalation exposure. So where do we get these toxicity criteria from? At the state level, we have Cal EPA. Underneath Cal EPA, we have multiple agencies, including the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, or OEHA, and DTSC. OEHA is responsible for, within the state of California, to develop and establish the toxicity criteria that DTSC and other agencies within the state of California use. DTSC also oversees the use of these criteria within our program. So then, on the federal level, we have US EPA, and there are multiple agencies within US EPA. 2 of those are the National Center for Environmental Assessment, and within that is there's a department called Office of Research and Development, and then another department called Superfund. Both ORD and Superfund have the ability and do develop toxicity criteria. The criteria that are developed through ORD go into their Integrated Risk Information System, or IRIS program, and then the Superfund program, who also has the ability to develop toxicity criteria, the values that they develop are called Provisional Peer Reviewed Toxicity Values, or PPRTV. These values are developed upon request by somebody when a value for that chemical does not exist in IRIS. Now, both the values in OEHA and ORD undergo a substantial peer review process, including public comment period. So what DTSC has been doing, our longstanding practice for over 2 decades, is to use the more health protective toxicity criteria from the OEHA program and from the IRIS program. Next slide. Recently, DTSC has been challenged on how we select our toxicity. And this is in part due to a 2003 US EPA guidance document that came out that establishes a hierarchy for selection of toxicity criteria at Superfund sites. That hierarchy lists the IRIS values of the Tier 1 values, the PPTRV values of the Tier 2 values, and then Tier 3 values are values from other sources, such as the WEHA. The WEHA is called out in that guidance document. However, that guidance document is not a mandate that you must use values in that order. In fact, that guidance document also talks about using best professional judgment when you select toxicity criteria, using best available science when you select toxicity criteria, and what it does provide the hierarchy as a starting point for when you need to select the toxicity criteria. And that there are times when a Tier 1 value may not necessarily be the best value, and a Tier 3 value may be a better choice. Slide. So I'm going to turn it back over to Kevin, who is going to talk about the specifics of what is in the proposed regulations that DTSC currently has out.
So back to the rule again. As Kim mentioned, DTSC is being increasingly challenged by some responsible parties on whether we should be using IRIS values or state OHIA toxicity criteria values for federal need Superfund sites. Partly in response to that, but also to make sure that we apply toxicity criteria consistently across the state at all sites and take into consideration California-specific factors. We're promulgating this rule that specifies the use of certain OHIA toxicity criteria that provide a higher level of protection than the federal counterpart. And as mentioned before, these toxicity criteria will be used for all screening, or used for human health risk assessments, and for setting screening levels and remediation goals. So one of our goals is to ensure that the rule is an applicable and relevant and appropriate requirement, so that it's applicable to all federal need Superfund sites. ARRs are a legal term that are defined in the NCP, or National Contingency Plan, and there are standards that are required to be met for cleanup remedy decisions. Next slide, please. In part to address public concerns that were expressed in our December 12th workshop, we removed the discussion, or the section that discussed the setting of cleanup goals, and that was in one of the sections of the rule. We also modified language on identifying the appropriate toxicity criteria for risk assessments. So during this workshop, we received a substantial amount of input, actually received some comment letters, and we've actually made substantial changes to a rule to accommodate as many of the comments, as much of the input as we could. We also made some changes to clear up additional concerns by the public that the rule appeared to be replacing MCLs and that we would be applying more stringent toxicity criteria than currently in use. And we want to emphasize that the rule does neither of these things. So similar to the Osborne Directive that Dr. Getman spoke of, the rule establishes a hierarchy for selecting toxicity criteria. The hierarchy factors in California-specific conditions, which I'll discuss in more detail in the next slide. The rule also defines screening levels for non-cancer and cancer risk, and last, specifies the use at all hazardous substance release sites in California under DTSC jurisdiction. Next slide, please. Now for some specifics on the rule. Section 69021 parallels Osborne Directive 9285.7-53, which is what Dr. Kevin was talking about earlier, but it also factors in California's unique conditions. And excuse me, I'm going to walk over here and ensure I'm actually near the speaker, because this is how the web stream is hearing us. In deriving these values, OHIA takes into consideration California's diverse population, factoring in race and age sensitivities, as well as exposure due to cultural and income level differences. They're also based on the best available science, and are consistent with state environmental justice and child protection objectives. If a toxicity criteria is not provided in Appendix 1 of the rule, then the IRIS toxicity criteria should be used. If If a value is unavailable in either of those sources, either IRIS or the Appendix 1 of the rule, then other credible sources may be used, including those from US EPA, their RSLs, or their PPRTVs, remediation screening levels, and I forgot what PPRTVs are. Tim mentioned it earlier. Or minimal risk levels that are available in the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, and other credible sources that we identify in the rule. However, the third-tier criteria selection must be approved by the DTSC, the Chief of the Human and Ecological Risk Office. So, Sections 69400.5 and 69022, Subpart A, they set a narrative standard, which is a legal requirement for the rule to be an ARAR. For clarity and consistency, Section 69022, Subpart B, defines cancer risk and the hazard quotient for screening levels. And last, the rule specifies that the selection of toxicity criteria are consistent with other California regulations. Next slide. So, here we show how the rule works for setting the PC indoor air screening levels for indoor air for PC. What it's showing is that for two sites that are side by side, there's a potential for having substantially different screening levels. It all depends upon whether or not it's a federal lead site or a state lead site. For the commercial industrial pathway, the state and federal levels are 2 and 47 micrograms per cubic meter, which is more than an order of magnitude difference. Without this regulation, having different values at different sites would be difficult to manage from a state perspective, as well as expose some people to more risk than others. This is one example of the various contaminants that are affected. There are several others, including common contaminants, benzene, vinyl chloride, and lead. All right, so our next steps, as mentioned before me, we're going to be holding another public workshop on August 31st in Cypress. On September 20th, we'll be having our formal public hearing, which also coincides with the closure of our public comment period. From there, we'll be developing responses to comments and put together the regulatory package that will be submitted to the Office of Administrative Law for their review. And our goal is to adopt the final rule by the end of this year or early next year. And all that information is available on our website, which is available here. Tammy, I think you're going to give some closing comments.
As Kevin stated, our formal comment period will end on September 20th, and we will ask that those comments are in writing, either by mail or email. You can send those to Kevin at DTSC at 8800 Cal Center Drive, Sacramento, California, 95826, or at the Toxicity Rule at email. For further information, you can go to this website. All this information is in your packet on that slide, on that part of it.
That was it. So,
That was it?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go back.
Thanks.
And now we're going to begin the question and answer portion of this workshop. So anyone that would like to come sit at the table or sit closer so that you can hear the question. And Kevin, talking and answering and taking questions.
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to make it so that the webcast gets the video, but pretty sure everyone can still pay attention. Still respond to the question.
Anyone have a question?
Yeah, I can go first. Okay. So my first question is, what is the plan for updating the Appendix 1? Will Appendix 1 be regularly updated in respective times and others? For example, the benzoate pricing was updated. For example, what's the process? So So as you know, benzoate pyrene is not in Appendix 1 because UTSC uses the recently updated USP iron value. If there is a value that comes out from a WEHA that is updated, or if we have a value in our table that IRIS updates and it is to determine that it is a better value or more scientifically judged value, UTSC will be doing a tool and amending then the appendix either way. Either removing a value if we have to, or adding another value if we have to. We will go through the formal amendment process. So we will be regularly launching values that release that go from the content.
Sorry because of the difficulties of the room, I'm going to wheel this kind of to the center of the room because this is the only way that people who are on the webcast can actually hear us. Our boardroom, unfortunately, got taken away from us. Go ahead and come over here.
You take another question? Are you satisfied with this answer? I have a lot more questions, but I'll give others a chance.
Actually, it'll help if anybody who asks any questions introduce yourself
Yeah.
also. That way we will have.
My name is Mala Patnaik.
Well, if I can follow on to that, David Bell, Air Force. So you regularly watch it. Is there any time frame for how long that would take to get it through?
For the amendment process, we've heard anywhere from about roughly 6 months, I believe, that once we start the amendment process, we will have to, we have not done an amendment, so we're guessing. We've heard it could be about a 6-month process.
We're told it's quicker than actual rulemaking, but
Yeah, I mean, it's as quick as 6 months, probably as long as 12. So 6 to 12 months to go through the process of rulemaking to amend and update the appendix.
Sorry, in the back.
Yeah, Jeff Signature, there's, help me understand why hierarchy fixed values in the regulation versus department has discretion to choose the value that reflects the best available science from any source appropriate.
So I believe you're getting at, so instead of the process that we've been doing where we've had the discretion of choosing the best available value, it stems down to that we've been substantially challenged by federal sites, and it's been very time consuming going through formal disputes that are taking years to solve. And DTSC felt that we needed to memorialize our process to start to save time. Both our work and the work of the RP is holding up other projects because projects are waiting for the outcome of the disputes on which toxicity criteria do we use. And what this regulation is trying to do is just to memorialize what our existing practices.
And I would like to emphasize that we really do believe we're still applying the best available science. Admittedly, we're losing some flexibility in the approach. But at least this allows anybody to immediately recognize what values they should be using at a site, rather than spending a tremendous amount of resources by all parties to try to figure out what would be the appropriate value. So in some respects, it actually helps in the process.
So presumably, then I'm sorry, just a follow-on question. The department has made determination for each of the criteria in Appendix 1. And for those that are not included in Appendix 1, for which WEHA values exist,
Correct.
that those values that are omitted do not reflect the best available science, therefore you're defaulting something else. You've done that in every instance. If that's the case, then it would be helpful, I think, for the regulated community to see that information and find a statement of reasons.
And there are more factors than just best available, than just saying best available science.
And for some of the values, they do have to be peer reviewed. And there are values that have not gone through the peer review process through WEHA that we have been using. And so those values did not make it into our table because they did not meet that peer review crisis, that peer review status.
Thank you, Gordon. So just following up on that, so the third tier of that hierarchy, my question is about cases that are like PTSD responsive.
you have to get approval by the supervising toxicologist. How does that process work in selecting the third level of toxicity?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm sure you can answer that, but we might need to speak loud to either you or we will restate what your question is kind of loud so that make sure that people can hear it. I apologize.
So I'll just restate the question. So the question was regarding the third tier sources. And in the regulation, we have written in there that it must be approved by the supervising HERO chief, toxicologist, or his or her designee. And so one of the things that HERO does do and has been doing and will continue to do is that when we review our memos, they're all peer reviewed, and they're all peer reviewed up through our supervisor. And so it will be put into a process. Will be put into we will put a process in to ensure that whether it is the HERO, the actual HERO supervisor, or his or her designee is able to review those toxicity collection of those. That will be done in written form through the memos that we write for the.
And you're saying that's going to be to see what the process is, like selecting the other tier 3 values.
I would assume if it's a memo to the file.
It's a memo to the file, yeah.
Selecting the appropriate toxicity criteria for use at that site, that would probably be a public record.
Yeah, and I mean, the idea is that nothing will change. If we are currently using a value from a PPTRB, or we're currently using a value from ASTCR, those are other sources, that will continue to be used. We're not saying you can't use those anymore. We stuck it in the regulation to ensure that there was consistency, that we didn't have anybody going rogue and recommending a value that has never been used before or a value that isn't up to date. So that's part of the justification for the way that portion of the regulation.
Okay. So consistency.
Yes.
Okay.
With the EGOS papers.
Right, it ensures the department is consistent.
Within itself, too.
State one.
Yeah.
Just a footnote, that peer review that you mentioned is all in-house peer review.
Yeah.
And so it's just
The third criteria, right. Sorry, for this third tier.
the third tier.
Yeah.
Right. It's not like we're putting it out for public comment and peer review. It is going to be an in-house review so that the suit is assured that more than one person thinks that's the correct value to use.
Yeah, I guess I'll back up a little bit. When HERO writes a memo for a site, when we're involved on a site and we write a memo that goes to our project manager, and then the project manager passes that on to the RP, all of our memos internally are peer reviewed internally within HERO. And those are typically peer reviewed by either another HERO staffer and then the supervisor, or just the supervisor. So we in HERO don't just write a memo and send that off without having at least one other set of eyes.
Do you want to spell it with?
Human and Ecological Risk Office.
Actually, there are a lot of acronyms in the rules that used during the presentation, but they are discussed in the rule package in case you are not familiar with IRIS and other acronyms. I think in a nutshell, what I'd just like to add at the end is that the purpose of this rulemaking is also to provide more consistent and more upfront information to various parties who are involved in different types of cleanups, and not to leave the responsible party in limbo, not knowing what exactly they should use for their documents that they prepare to submit to DTSC, and also to make sure that all DTSC staff use a consistent approach. And as you heard, we don't want one person to take a more stringent approach than everybody else to how they clean up one site. So this will give consistency throughout the department, throughout the state for all the cleanup projects, and it also lays out the foundation on how you would go about selecting. OHIA does not have a CRB use an value for one of these compounds that then you go to the EPA IRIS. If it doesn't exist in both, still the process that exists today is still the same, that you would use the best scientific number, but we put in actually more assurance here that that decision is also going to be reviewed by a supervisor of our toxicologist group so that it makes sure he or she will consistently apply it throughout the.
So just as the understand, if there's a site in California, does this apply to all sites? Regardless of who the lead agency is, what it's like, water board is it? How does that toxicity criteria? How does that?
That's more of a legal question, so I don't want to jump in and pretend like I'm an attorney.
We have coordinated with the water board, more coordination. Because we are not the water board, we're not able to do rulemaking for them. But we anticipate that once this rule is final, it will have gone through the process, therefore be something that they lean on. They're going to want to be. It's possible that through it was better for them, but we wanted to be out there on rather than later. Wait to iron out everything that's possible. Any more questions?
Oh, yeah. David Bell, Air Force. So follow-up. So the 67 analytes in the appendix are in there because they have OHIA values, and they've all been through a public or a peer review process. Yes. And that is documented in the supplemental documents on the website.
Yes, that's why we provided them there.
So even though there's only 29 in this listing, these 29 cover all 67.
That's correct, because if you look at, so some of the listings, I think it's number 3 or number 4, it's not just one chemical underneath there, there's multiple chemicals. So instead of posting, because some of the chemicals come from the same document that we have published, especially their reference concentrations or their RELs, reference exposure levels. IRIS calls them reference concentration, so we have called them reference exposure levels. They're the same. So a number of those chemicals came from the same document. Instead of publishing the same document under each chemical 5-6 times on their website, I have lumped everything together into one, and then the title of it is each chemical that would be found in that document. So yes, they should all be there. It's just we only have 29 documents because several chemicals come from the same.
Some of them are different isomers. So if you look at, for example, line 9 and 10, they're the same compounds. One is a D, one is a K. So it is different isomers of the same compound.
Yes. So like all the any VAP document, also to the NDIs, they're the same thing. Some of the other. So when we list on there, like beryllium, beryllium oxide, beryllium sulfide, they're all from the document. Yeah, so that would explain the differences between the number of documents that are actually on the website, numbers 1 through 29 versus the 7. The toluene 2,4 and 2-sulfonate, those all come from the same document, so those are all lumped together. There's 3.
Does that address your question?
Yes.
However, to the extent that you find a glitch, please do let us know. Send us a quick email because we'd like to rectify that. That happens.
Glitches.
Yeah, speaking of glitches, I just want to make
Little minor announcement here. The announcement went out to everybody, has a link to this webcast, which sends you to another part of Cal EPA. To actually get to this webcast, it's epanet.ca.gov. We apologize for that, and we'll make sure it's corrected by Thursday. At least there'll be, I don't know if we plan to have a webcast.
Well, I guess.
We'll make that correction. Scroll down. Once you get to that web page, scroll down until you see toxicity criteria rulemaking. Click on it.
Obviously, it's going to affect anyone here in the room, but if you have colleagues that say, hey, what happened?
Yeah.
We'll fix it, so by Thursday there will be a webcast that the link will come.
And some of the folks were able to see the webcast, but they were more familiar on how to find it. They've done this before. So this will be available on Thursday.
Can you say say one more time?
It's epanet, epanet.ca.gov. Scroll down, and you'll see the.
I work here, and I came over here because I could not get on. And I went through the EPA one.
No, it's working because a couple of people already checked that out, that it's not the exact link that is on what we know it. Don't we have a limit on how many questions? Go ahead.
You keep us here till 4, right?
Yeah, getting paid by the hour.
Must be an attorney.
Get paid by the question. Answers. Past prior documents that have been approved in the statement of reasons, there's reference to prior remedial decisions are not automatically changed. But it refers to section 69020 subdivision D as accomplishing that. And does it do that by referencing to a previous code? Because OIC section D is other terms not defined or specified in the health and safety code.
You found a glitch in the ISOR. It references certain language that was in a prior draft of the RIP.
And
Can you repeat that, Kevin? So
what
you said.
the language in the ISOR points to is text that we had in a prior draft of the regulation, where the regulation stated that prior decision documents were not specifically impacted by this regulation. We felt it was unnecessary to have that language in the regulation, just by default. The regulation doesn't make us open up all prior decision documents. So we saw no need to have that language in the regulation. Unfortunately, the ISOR, that text didn't get deleted out of it.
Particularly since we're not changing the way we have done the cleanup.
So presumably, if anything, we're still doing what we were doing previously. So yeah, nothing should change anyhow.
Right.
You have a question back there?
Hi, thank you. Hi, Dawn Kepke with QCAP Associates on behalf of the just as point of clarification. So will this be retroactive or will we have the opportunity?
It is prospective.
So
However,
we'll be opening closed.
We will not be reopening closed sites. However, sites that are undergoing 5-year reviews might have to be looked at if toxicity criteria that are used in those prior decision documents have changed.
Which is, again, the same process that we...
The current process. That is correct.
So it's not changing.
It might have to be looked at as in what would be.
It will be looked at.
Well, it will be, because the National Contingency Plan and federal regs, as you know, for 5-year reviews requires that you check out the protectiveness and the adequacy of your remedy. And it does look for new science on what you consider protective. So these values in our reg would necessarily be part of that evaluation.
And 5-year review guidance is quite explicit. You need to look at the toxicological criteria, correct?
specifically calls out toxicity.
And to Ms. Kepke's question, if, however, the department, as out of an abundance of caution, if somehow the department were to get a complaint about some site posing an unhealthy risk, we would not turn away our eyes. We would look at what information was available to us and then make an evaluation. We couldn't just turn a blind eye to a complaint. But we are not using this to reopen old decisions. This is not a retroactive rule, to my knowledge. I don't think we can do that.
And I want to put a caveat in Vivian's abundance of cautious comment, and that is, we're not telling you that as soon as somebody makes a complaint about a site, we're going to go back and open it and apply this rule.
Right.
I think the comment that Vivian made was that if there is a real health impact issue that was not considered before that has come up, we will investigate, determine whether or not there is a risk that wasn't considered before, and same process that we do today, that we look at whether or not that poses a danger, and so we will take appropriate action. But that has nothing to do with this rule. It's the nature of the way we process it.
I guess this might be for most of it. Yeah. I'm Roman Rock, and I actually work here too. I'm in the munitions response program. My question pertains to, I've heard that it could take 6 to 12 months, possibly, for this amendment to take place, the process. I'm most concerned about the transition. What we do in the interim between now, we have a number of these sites, military sites that are in process. Their work plans are in place. Remedial actions being completed. They are looking at some of these older values, the values we have now. And they are doing their cleanups for those values. And when we go to these meetings, they're asking us, the state, should we use this number that we have now, or should we be anticipating some values that may be much lower than the cleanup that we're having our objectives right now?
Well, I would suggest, Roland, to talk to your supervisor about a specific project, and then those decisions are made accordingly. But again, the purpose is not to delay an amendment, but this is just, typically it takes that long to do a rule amendment because you have to do the initial statement of reason. I don't like to call it ISOR, but it is called ISOR. You have to provide workshops. You have to notice if the proposed rule, get comments. So the process takes that long. It's not that we will not, as soon as we find out there is a contaminant that has a new value, we don't want to delay it so that you get projects going to cut in between. But that's the type of case where I'm guessing that we will have far and few in between. That's happened all the years.
I just want to make sure for clarification, are you talking about here and now, or should a value change in the future and we have to make a change to the regulation to reflect that changing toxicity?
I think that's what I should say is many of these projects are long-term. They start a year ago in action. And it takes a year to get to the point where they're going to, now we're going to do the work based on the work plan that was approved, say, a year ago. So what I'm getting at is the military units are cleaning up to that value. Should we be telling them to maybe start looking at new toxicity criteria, because they are going to come at some point and they don't want either no further action or we want it to be used on these values.
So for here and now, the values are unchanged of what we've been using. So you can continue to proceed with what we've been doing and the values you've been using. Sometime in the future, if a value for a contaminant is going to be changed, your toxicologists are likely to be able to tell you that as early as possible. They'll be able to tell you that as early as possible, that There's one coming down the pipe. Eventually, we're going to have to make an amendment or a modification to the rule to reflect the new value. It's worth your responsible party to recognize. It's worth it for them to recognize that this new toxicity criteria may be coming in sometime near future. And they have to make the decision, I suppose, at that time. Well, should we not want to ahead of time start implementing a new value or continue with the one that's on the rules, on the books?
Actually, if I could add to that, toxicity criteria values do not just drop out of the sky. There is a full-on public peer review process before a number is adopted in the first place. So chances are there's going to be some discussion in the background. You're going to hear that some new proposed number is pending, and hopefully so will programs so that they will have a little bit of a leg up on the rulemaking process. So this number is not just going to drop out of the sky and then boom, need to be amended, right? There's going to be some lead up to it. So there will be a heads up about a pending change. There will be a heads up about whether or not an amendment to this rule. And then, you know, hopefully with some good open discussions, the RP will have a chance to decide how much will that really change my risk range, management range, right? Your range, and then see how much that affects their proposed remedy, or it might come up in a 5-year review, since that has to be done something like every 5 years from the start of the trigger. So you've got multiple points to have this discussion, so it shouldn't necessarily be a surprise to anyone.
And the other thing is that HERO publishes quarterly HERO updates, and those are made available publicly to the public. They go out internally within DTSC, and they're also on our HERO website, that where we do let people know when new tox values are coming and what's coming down the pipeline. And so that's another means for HERO to be able to get the word out there with, you know, if this regulation, when this regulation is passed, that's a means for HERO on a quarterly basis to put a notice in there that people will have access.
I get to add one more little caveat is implementing the rule really doesn't change anything, to be honest, because toxicity criteria do change in the interim. I've got sites where we did the feasibility study 10 years ago, and toxicity criteria changed now that we're getting to the rod. Everyone has to look at, I mean, at some point we're going to have to update the remedy decision to reflect those changing toxicity criteria that have changed in the last 10 years. It has to be done, unfortunately. The rule just codifies it.
Right, and I mean, I have a site right now that I just reviewed where our remedial goal is based off of tox criteria and a risk-based. It's a risk-based remedial goal that California just recently MCL for that chemical. That MCL is lower than our RG, and so my comment is, okay, what's our plan of attack? If they're going to be, it's the federal facility site, so we do explanation differences for rod amendments, but it's constantly happening. It's nothing new. It's nothing that. Or I think it's the point that Kevin and I are making is that the toxicologists are on top of it, have the means and ability to announce the stuff to the public and send DTSC to our HERO quarterly updates, and that's part of one of the toxicologist's jobs is to make sure we're aware of that.
I have a secondary page. Can the department speak to the peer review process for values that are not MCLs or are not developed through the IRIS program? Yeah, when we're talking about EHA values developed all reviewed, developed and peer reviewed individual basis, or are they rest?
Right. So it depends on the values. It depends on the age of the values. So if on the website, you'll notice that, you know, some of them are lumped together. A number of the RSCs are lumped together because they did a bunch of them at one time. The most recent one, actually the most recent two that OEHA did through their hotspots program was the benzene RSC, which was an individual one. Went through their SRP, which is their scientific panel. They had their meeting, their public hearing, their public meeting, and all the transcripts and everything is available publicly. E is actually the most recent value that's at where they, went through the formal process. That was an individual one. The toluene, Q4 and 4,6 disulfonate, those were together. They did those together. So it kind of just depends on, one, when those values were done by OEHA and what the request was at the time. Most of them are individual, but there are some that are lumped.
I think the takeaway from that is a fully public process where anybody can participate and provide comments, and as it goes in front of the scientific panel and throughout the process where we got changes or adopts and new types.
Can you speak to kind of, I think as I understood it, kind of following up on Jeff's question, you mentioned kind of your internal peer review process. That process a greater depth about what the steps are with the review process is to ensure integrity of the numbers and values of the client. So,
sorry, before you restate the question for the audience.
Okay, so I will restate it. I want to make sure that, okay, so are you talking about the internal peer review process to choose the number, or with respect to section 69021C with the values, third tier value? The third tier, I believe. Okay, so the question is, what is DTSC's internal process going to be for making sure that we have consistency? This kind of goes back to, and I'm sorry, Mala asked the question earlier. We will have to put, already within HERO, we have the process of when toxicity criteria are selected, when we write our memos, we know which values are to be used. We go off of our human and ecological risk note 3, which lists the values that DTSC recommends to be used along with the screening levels. And then when the value is not there, we use IRIS. So that's kind of where we go right now when we're writing our memos, we're reviewing our site. We're looking to see whether or not the site is following what our current guidance recommends, whether it's using note 3 values. We will continue to do that. As I said, all of our memos are peer reviewed up through our supervisor, and we will have to implement in process that the chief of HERO, whether he sees all of our memos or he designates somebody to see all of the memos, that process has not been put into place. That will be put into place once this rule goes final. That is something, if the chief decides to designate the senior to supervising as his designee for reviewing that, then that process is already in place. That's what we do already.
But I think what we're envisioning is having, let's say we're getting esoteric chemical where we don't have published data, the staff toxicologist would come up with a number that would be peer reviewed by a fellow toxicologist or a supervisor, and then the chief HERO would approve that process to ensure that it's happening.
Right, and those would be for values that aren't values that from the ASCDR or values that aren't from either WEHA other values or PBCRV values. Yeah, if you have a site where there is no toxicity criteria for a chemical, your site comes up with a toxicity criteria for that. The project team, the toxicologist, you guys determine a toxicity criteria that suits that site for that chemical, then it would go up through, and then the HERO would have the final decision on that. If it's for like ranges that something where there really is no other values out. If it's a chemical where there's already a listed value from sources, then I would imagine that it's going to go through the same process. Is there the ability for stock and put into that process that you have internally? If there's a discrepancy?
These are site-specific decisions that she's talking about in terms of what numbers are already in use. Because again, this reg is just trying to say, this is what we already do. We're just making it official. Okay? So in terms of the existing third-tier numbers that we already use, and that's all we're looking to do right now, because that already gets updated quarterly for availability and quality of science. That's in the HERO Note 3 that's available on our website. We're not proposing to come up with something new there. It's just that every memo that is site-specific that ends up using one of those numbers, one of these Tier 3 numbers, those are the available sources that we're aware of or most commonly used, There's an internal quality control process. That QA/QC is what Kim's talking about as peer review, because the peers are all toxicologists, PhD types, and they review it. And then for consistency, make sure that the chief or the chief designee is going to approve it as well.
But I think
it's not a peer review, public peer review, scientific review, board.
That's clarifying.
Is that helpful? It's just making sure we do QA/QC and see so that we're not all over the map.
But I think the first thing that Kim said, the RP is always welcome to propose what they think is the right criteria, toxicity criteria, and then PTSD will evaluate it. It's not that we just hiatus and come up with a number without telling anybody.
Yeah, I would think if you're at that point at your site, you're in discussions because there are no other sources available. So you are working as a team to come up. I mean, I know cases where we have sites where there are no toxicity. You're working as a team and the regulatory is going to.
What about if there is a chemical for either tier 1, tier 2, but you're looking for an alternative toxicity? For example, a non-chronic situation. Waiting for dialogue to alternative.
Yeah, I mean, this right now, we're really only dealing with the chronic component of it. So if you have a site where you are evaluating a the non-chronic, your subchronic exposure, and 2-hour exposure, we all have 1-hour wells or 8-hour wells. That's a completely separate situation. Pulls back from that part of what.
Yes, Mr. I'm a toxicologist at UTSC. I just wanted to follow up on Vivian's point that yes, our standard procedure is to use the toxicity criteria that and screening levels that are listed in the Human Health Risk Assessment Note 3. That is the standard procedure that we use. So it's not we're pulling something out of the hat, rather we're using established procedures that are approved by the department and approved by the supervising toxicologist for its designate in HERO. That's standard procedure.
Thanks, Chief.
I'll follow up on that. So the external peer review process, is there, how does it parallel the IRIS peer review process? Do you only put it?
You're talking about the OE values in particular.
Yeah.
Yes, it does, and that's why it qualified as high enough confidence to be named in the Osler directive.
Okay.
Hi, Dawn Kempkin again. One of the comments that Steve put in comments earlier, late January, one of the largest concerns that we had was around the issue of flexibility for site-specific decisions, specifically if you have a particular site that is going to, whether that site is going to be used for, children's playground, park settings, versus, a paved parking lot, and the ability to kind of look at, the flexibility or consider a variance of some sort, depending on site-specific how they may in the future. Is it fair to presume, based on what I've seen here, you're not contemplating any flexibility whatsoever?
No. That would be tough.
I'm a little confused.
That would be tough. What we're saying is we all want to start with the same tox.
Okay, yeah.
These chemicals have effects. We want to agree that those effects. You're talking about exposure. In other words, a playground, you have a young child being exposed 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. That's a pretty intense exposure. A parking lot, you cut off that pathway. So when you look at that, it's going to be a very different exposure scenario. So your cleanup goal is going to be really quite different. Of course, you have to deal with other things like this. Holes, if you're going to say, we can look at lead. Most people are pretty common lead. For an unreleased site, 80 is a good number. If you're a site that's in the hundreds, you could put a parking lot there, but we're going to want institutional controls to ensure that parking lot doesn't get dug up and turned to a daycare. We're not paying attention. So at many industrial sites, we have cleanup goals well above a residential scenario because we look at those pathways. So we do have varying cleanup goals when they're applied at site-specific locations. But we do start with the same tox data. It's just that what happens is when you go from, you're dealing with exposure pathways.
I think the short answer is that this regulation doesn't do anything about your question. It's still going to be addressed the same way with or without this regulation, because this regulation only identifies what's the toxicity value for a compound, not what risk management decision you have to make or what controls you put in for a specific project.
And the flexibility is in the risk management decision process at a later time.
To follow up on both what Ray and Dustin just said, when you're coming up with the cleanup goal for, let's just say, a park scenario, you have this long equation that has multiple inputs. Tox criteria are just one input of that equation. You're still going to be able to input all your site-specific conditions into that equation to come up with your cleanup goal. Just as if you had a commercial site or a residential site. The only thing that's being fixed in that equation is the tox criteria. All of those other inputs that are site-specific now get to come into play. And then you still are allowed, because this regulation does not fix your exposure. It does not fix exposure time, does not fix exposure date, does not fix the body weight of a child or the body weight of an adult, or how long you're going to be exposed to it, the length. The only thing that it's fixing in that equation that you use to develop that remediation goal or that cleanup goal is the tox criteria. That's it. Everything else is still all site-specific when you get to that point.
And that calculation leads you to your endpoints of your risk management range, and the project management team still picks the cleanup goal within the risk management range. The risk management range is not changing. The remediation goal is not being set by this regulation. Does that help?
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions?
I think my last one. I know the initial statement of reasons document is not there. It's not part of the regulation, but to clarify, there's a section here that says the purpose of Section 690222 subdivision C is to state, continue, follow the NCP, and be consistent with it. Is that another, because I don't see that actually stated.
That's correct. Again, the ISOR that got posted unfortunately has a little bit of extra language in there that didn't make any language.
However, our statute does require us to be not inconsistent with federal law and regulation and guidance. We are not going to restate our statute and our reg. This is merely to clarify one very small aspect of risk assessment so that we all know which numbers we're using as our toxicity criteria, not as our exposure factors or anything else. We're not changing the NCP risk range or that process. We're just trying to anchor essentially the protectiveness that results once you do those calculations. We're not actually anchoring any particular cleanup level for any particular site. Is that helpful?
Yes.
Okay, good. You probably are going to call me after.
Well, I think the comments you're making are very helpful. We make sure the final statement of reason is correct. And not...
Part of the reason the language isn't in the rule anymore, because the rule doesn't need to have that language in. The principles are still present, and there's no reason for us to regulate those principles. So it was, we originally thought the rule required certain additional statements, and then we, on reflection, realized it isn't necessary.
Yeah, we don't need to reiterate what's already there.
Yes, I'm sorry, can we just revisit the prior conversation? So the cleanup goal is not, it is separate and apart from this, what I understand you're saying.
It is downstream, if you will.
So then the concern, okay, so why I think, kind of loop it all back, I think part of the concern and why I think I'm slightly caught up on this and a little confused is that as part of the proposed remediation goal definition, references that it is a continuous that's one of the number of things and serves as a final for the response to corrective action. So I guess I'm unclear as to where the flexibility is if remediation goal is based on a contaminant.
It's based on, okay? So think of the, I hope algebra is okay for folks. Think of 4x.
That might be my problem.
So 4x plus 5, okay? X is a variable, right? It could be the appropriate number for PCE. It could be the appropriate tox value for something else, benzoate, which I don't even know what that is. Okay? But that number is going to be within this reg. Okay? But it could be plus B plus C plus D, and all those, those things could be your exposure assumptions. But in the end, you're still going to have a 10 to the minus 4 risk range concentration and a 10 to the minus 6 risk range concentration. And I guess they'll be like this. The 10 to the minus 6 is lower risk, right? And you're still going to be able to pick your cleanup goal in here. But because you use the toxicity criteria, range will be here, potentially, rather than here. Does that make sense? You will serve as an anchor for each of those numbers.
The important language is based on. Doesn't mean that is the value. The value is based in part on this one item as well as a bunch of other items.
Right. So when we develop cleanup goals or remediation goals, some of the things that go into the equation is, as Vivian had said, is you set it at a 1 times 10 to the minus 6. You probably also would develop a number at 1 times 10 to the minus 5. And you would develop a number at 1 times 10 to the minus 4. So that's one component of the equation. Another component of the equation is the exposure duration. How long are they going to be exposed to? 8 hours, 2 hours, 24 hours. Another is exposure frequency. Are they going to be exposed, if it's a child, 2 days a week, because that's the scenario, because it's a playground. If it's an adult, 8 hours a week, or 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, because it's a work scenario, or is it 24 hours a day because it's a resident? So all of those variables in that equation are all adjusting. Those are all flexible. Nowhere in this regulation are we saying you have to set when you're developing your cleanup goals and proposing a cleanup goal, we're not saying that you have to, we're not setting any of those other variables but that tox.
That tox criteria is based on empirical is the word, but it's the best available science that we think should be applicable to California residents.
Was it okay? I'm not really sure. I think I'm still confused. So follow up. You can call me on. Okay. Thank you. I think we got a poster right here.
Yeah. It's from Robert Trump, GSHS. Could Barbara talk about compounds that are considered mutagenic?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was writing.
What about compounds that are considered
mutagenic?
There's
no language in the regulation because the way the department views those is we view those as, so we don't adjust the tox criteria, we adjust the risk assessment. And so we're going to continue to follow the practice that's being followed. We're not accounting for that in the regulation. We're going to continue practice that EFC does and to do and to follow, and what EPA does for their compounds that I know that are needed.
Is there a department policy?
We follow US EPA's guidance.
By statute, we need to follow federal guidance. And although we do have a disagreement with certain other parties about how exactly to interpret certain portions, we do follow that, and we do believe that we follow it in good faith. And so where the federal guidance has adjustments in formulae for that, that's how it would be entered in.
Yeah, so for trichloroethylene or TC, for example, US EPA has declared that only a component of their tox criteria, there's 3 values that go into their tox criteria, only the kidney component is mutagenic, so they know. And so they adjust it afterwards. We do the same thing, follow the same guidance. If you look at our Human Health Note 3, it talks about that we acknowledge the same 9, don't quote me on that, chemicals that EPA has deemed mutagenic because they know their mode of action. DPSC does, we acknowledge the same. We follow what they do.
So it's not, there's a rumor out there that the department is implementing eugenic density for all cancer.
I mean, I wouldn't be news to us. That's not in this rule.
It's not part of this rule. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if that's a rumor that's out there, but that is not what we are doing, and that is not, there's no language in this rule to address that.
That's not going to be.
Not that I've heard of, but I'm just one person, you know.
Sorry, I have to go to another meeting, but thank you everybody for coming to this workshop.
Doesn't mean the meeting's over. You're welcome to ask more questions.
Any more questions? Okay, that's all right. Kevin?
Well then, looks like we're done here for the meeting. To reiterate what we've said before, just a reminder that we're doing another workshop on Thursday, another opportunity, if you'd like, to fly down to Cyprus and ask us more questions. Of course, the comment closure date is September 20th. We're also having our public hearing on that date. And so we'll welcome whatever input you guys have for it. We want to try to address all your concerns as much as we can.
And don't forget, the hearing is on September 20th here at DTSC.
That likely will be in our boardroom in the other building.
We hope so.
Thanks again for coming in.